Hello students, welcome to this another discussion video on the topic accounting for income tax. So when we discuss about the accounting for income tax na topic, you have to understand that our accounting income, so the income that we are reporting in our financial statements, specifically in our profit or loss statement, is not equal to what will be reported or what will be the basis for tax purposes. So yung income natin per accounting, hindi siya equal or hindi siya the same doon sa income na pagbabasihan natin in the computation of our tax. Basically because etong accounting income natin, we follow the standards, mga provisions na nandyan sa ating PFRS tsaka PAS. So it has a different set of guidelines to be followed. So one of the differences na lang is here, under the accounting income, we are going to use accrual accounting. Whereas dito sa pag-compute ng taxable income natin, ang pinagbabasihan natin ay cash basis. So for the purpose of computing income, for tax purposes, we have to follow the provisions of the tax law. So therefore, doon pa lang magkaiba na yung treatment ng ibang items per accounting tsaka for tax purposes. So that is why it is really possible that yung accounting income natin ay hindi equal doon sa taxable income. And that is the purpose of this particular lesson, that we have to reconcile, we have to account for those differences, yung mga differences ng accounting income tsaka taxable income, dapat ma-identify natin so that we will be able to account for them appropriately in our records. So ano nga ba yung mga types of differences ng accounting income versus taxable income? So ito yung classifications ng accounting income tsaka taxable income na differences. So they can be classified as permanent differences and temporary differences. So let's talk about muna permanent differences. So pag sinabi nating permanent differences, these are those items of revenue and expense which are included in either accounting income or taxable income but will never be included in the other. So this pertain to non-taxable revenue and non-deductible expenses. So your knowledge in your income tax na subject will be needed in order for us to determine whether an item is taxable ba or hindi, or whether an expense is deductible ba or hindi, because yun yung mga permanent differences. So there are income that we report for accounting purposes but are no longer subject for tax purposes. So example na lang dito, if you can still recall in your income taxation na subject, yung mga interest income on deposits, yung mga income which have been subjected already to final tax. So yung mga income na yon, kasi nga na-deduct na yung final tax, naka-withhold na ng final tax for those types of income, like your interest income in deposits or your dividends received, since naka-withhold na ng final tax. So hindi na sila dapat masama doon sa mga income na sa subject for income tax. So for these items here, yung income or yung interest income on deposits na subject na sa 20% final na withholding tax ay isang permanent na or isang non-taxable na permanent difference. The same also with dividends received. So for example, if you are an individual na shareholder, tapos nakapag-receive or naka-receive ka ng dividends galing sa corporation. So take note, corporation will deduct already final withholding tax of 10%, no, sa marireceive mong cash dividend. So that's why pag meron tayong na-report, no, doon sa ating financial statements, no, may recognize tayong dividend income. So if that's a cash dividend na-receive mo, so hindi na yun masasubject to income tax. So dapat tanggalin na siya na if you want to compute for your taxable income, so since yung amount na yun is nasama sa accounting income, so dapat tanggalin na natin when we are going to compute for taxable income. So we also have mga life insurance premium. So there are types of life insurance, no? Like for example, nagbabayad ka, no, for this particular life insurance. So may mga life insurance premium na hindi siya deductible for tax purposes. At the same time, no, merong mga other expenses pa which are not deductible talaga for tax purposes. So they're not allowed, no, to be deducted for tax purposes. Like for example, your tax penalties or charges and fines. No? So it is literally as explicitly stated in the tax law that hindi siya pwedeng makonsider as deductible expenses, no, for the purpose of computing your taxable income. So there are still a lot of items, no, which we consider or which we can consider as permanent difference. And again, your knowledge in income taxation would be of great help for you to be able to determine which of the items presented are considered as permanent differences. Kasi ito yung mga items na non-taxable siya or non-deductible. So in no case, no, or in no instance na masasubject pa sila sa income tax or maa-allow sila as a deduction, no, for the purpose of computing your taxable income. So those are permanent differences. Another type of differences will be the temporary differences. So ito naman, no, these are differences between the carrying amount of an asset or liability and its tax base. No, so posible for accounting purposes, yung asset mo, ang carrying amount na reported is ganito, no? Tapos iba naman ang na-report mo na carrying amount for tax or yung tinatawag niya ditong tax base. So iba naman yung basis, no, for the computation of tax. So in short, there is what we call, no, yung mga timing differences. So it could be na itong item na to ay posibleng maging taxable, any, no, of kung taxable ba siya, yung na-report mong accounting income, in some future time, it will become taxable. No? Or itong deductible na to, for now, hindi mo na siya deductible, pero in some future date, no, upon, of course, compliance with the provisions of the tax laws, so posible na maging deductible siya in the future. So in short, there's only what we call timing differences. No? So there are items of income and expenses which are included in both accounting income and taxable income, but at different time periods. So itong mga klaseng temporary difference na to, itong mga temporary differences na to, yung mga items na to, this will give rise to either, no, a deferred tax asset or a deferred tax liability. So yung mga items na to, yung mga timing differences or mga temporary differences, we have to identify them, no, because this is the key in accounting for income tax. So yung temporary differences natin, we can classify them into either a taxable temporary difference or the other one is a deductible temporary difference. So ano bang kaibahan? So pag sinabing taxable temporary difference, this will result in future taxable amount in determining taxable income for future periods when the carrying amount of the asset are recovered or settled. So in short, class, for the time being, or magiging subject for tax purposes. So pag sinabing taxable temporary difference, so meaning itong item na to, hindi pa siya itatax ngayon. So itatax siya in some future time. So this type of temporary difference will result to what we call a deferred tax liability. So later we will try to identify no kung ano-ano ba yung mga items which we can consider as a taxable temporary difference. Or paano ba natin ma-identify na ito taxable temporary difference ay ito deductible temporary difference, because knowledge of determining or identifying whether such a difference, a temporary difference ba is taxable or deductible is very important in accounting for income tax. So next we have this, yung taxable naman na temporary difference. So this will result in future deductible amount naman in determining taxable income of future periods when the carrying amount of the asset or liability is recovered or settled. So dito sa deductible temporary difference, what happens is that you have already paid for the tax, no? Nagbayad ka na ng advance. So for tax purposes, na-report na siya as income. Pero for accounting purposes, i-report pa yon or masasama yon as income in some future dates pa. No? So that is deductible temporary difference. So this deductible temporary difference will result to a deferred tax asset. Okay, so this one is a summary here, no, of how do we determine if there is a deferred tax liability or if there is a deferred tax asset. So basically, kanina nasabi natin na there are two types of temporary differences. Yung temporary differences na yun yung mag-result in either a deferred tax liability or deferred tax asset. So dapat we can identify or be able to identify whether this particular temporary difference ba is a taxable temporary difference or a deductible temporary difference. Again, pag taxable temporary difference, it will result to a deferred tax liability. Pag deductible temporary difference, it will result to a deferred tax asset. Okay? So this will be our guide, no, in order to determine whether meron bang deferred tax liability or meron bang deferred tax assets. Or other way of saying it is that, is there a taxable temporary difference or is there a deductible temporary difference? Okay? So unahin na muna natin yung deferred tax liability. So ang sabi niya dito, meron daw deferred tax liability, no, kapag ang accounting income daw is higher than the taxable income. So there will be taxable temporary differences resulting to a deferred tax liability if the accounting income is higher than the taxable income. So let's try to check, no, mga items or situation scenarios which will result to deferred tax liability kasi meron tayong tinatawag na taxable temporary difference. Okay, so ito yung mga examples, no, na mag-result to a higher accounting income than the taxable income. So for example, if you have revenues and gains, no, included in the accounting income but are taxable pa in the future. So for example, your installment sale, no, your installment sale natin. So for accounting purposes, 'di ba, kahit hindi mo pa na-receive yung cash. So for as long as you've already delivered the goods, we recognize already revenue. We recognize already income for accounting purposes. However, for tax purposes, since cash basis yung kanya, so mare-report lang yun, no? Mare-report lang yun as part of the taxable income when you have collected it already. So yan. So kaya it will result to a deferred tax liability. So ito again, revenues and gains which are included in the accounting income but are taxable pa in the future periods are considered mga taxable temporary difference. So example niya, again, installment sale. What about under expenses and losses? Okay. So for expenses and losses, they are deductible for tax purposes in the current period, but deductible for accounting purposes in future periods. So, bale, for tax purposes, dineduct na, no? Nag-advance na og deduct for tax purposes. However, for accounting purposes, it will be deductible pa, no? Magiging i-deduct pa siya in the future. Another also way of analyzing this is actually taking into consideration kung ano yung effect ng item na to doon sa accounting income, na kung maging higher ba siya compared to taxable income. So, if we will analyze the item based on this premise that there is a deferred tax liability if the accounting income is higher than the taxable income. So let's try to analyze, no? Example, itong sa mga expenses and losses, no? Yung accelerated depreciation. So ano nangyari dito? Pag accelerated depreciation, ibig sabihin, for tax purposes, malaki yung dineduct mo na depreciation expense. So for example, for tax purposes, gumamit ka ng SYD or gumamit ka ng double declining. So it's accelerated, no? Mas malaki yung i-report mo na depreciation expense for tax purposes if you're using accelerated depreciation for tax purposes. So for example, in your books, no, in your accounting records, yung ginamit ay straight line. So straight line na amortization, na depreciation. So it follows that yung depreciation expense natin na i-report for tax purposes is dako. So dako ato ang i-report nga depreciation expense. But for accounting income, no, for accounting purposes, yung depreciation natin is mas maliit, no? Mas lower ang kanyang amount. So ang mangyayari, kung ang sa accounting part is gamay ra imong gamaynos because mas gamay to nga depreciation as compared to that method na nagigamit for tax purposes. So it will appear, no, that your accounting income will be higher than the taxable income. Bakit? Because accounting income mo, ang dinidak is konti lang na depreciation. Pero for tax purposes, mas malaki yung dinidak niya na related depreciation kasi nga accelerated daw. So in that scenario, your accounting income nga will be higher than the taxable income. So that item is considered a taxable temporary difference. So yung example niya. Accelerated depreciation, ano pa? Capitalized development cost, no? So for example, kinapitalize mo yung development cost. For accounting purposes, kinapitalize mo siya. So in short, development cost ay nireport mo, for example, as intangible asset na ba siya, no? Or wasting asset ba siya. Pero for tax purposes, lahat yun, ni-recognize mo lahat as expense, no? Or claim mo na lahat as deduction. So mas malaki yung diniduct mo for tax purposes compared to the deduction made, no, under the accounting income. Kasi nga kinapitalize mo tapos i-depreciate mo lang under accounting income. But for tax purposes, ang ginawa mo, ni-report mo lahat as deductible amount, no, for this period. For prepaid expense naman, for tax purposes, kasi cash basis tayo sa tax purposes, or in computing for the taxable income. So, since prepaid expense na yan, nag-cash out ka na, naglabas ka na ng pera. So, para sa computation of taxable income, kapag meron ka ng na payout, no, or meron ka ng cash outlay, considered na yun as expense, or in short, you can recognize it already, no, as deductible expense. So, for tax purposes, na-claim mo na as deduction, no, yung binayaran na prepaid expense. However, for accounting purposes, of course, 'di ba? I-debit mo pa 'yan sa asset, no? So nag-debit ka pa ng prepaid expense and then later mo na lang, no? I-check mo na lang kung magkano lang ang portion na nag-expired na. So yun lang yung i-report as deduction or as part of the expenses, no, under accounting purposes. So yan. So again, ito yung mga items na ma-consider natin as mga taxable temporary difference. So installment sale, accelerated depreciation, capitalization of your development cost, and the recognition of prepaid expense. Most of the taxable temporary differences arise because of the differences in timing of recognition of the transaction for accounting and tax purposes. However, there are other taxable temporary differences that technically are not timing differences, no? But nevertheless, they give rise to a deferred tax liability. So most probably ito yung mga items class na hindi siya tinick up, no, doon sa profit or loss, pero it has affected our asset or our liability. So what are those items? First, no, if we have upward revaluation of asset for accounting records. So pag meron tayong revaluation, no, merong increase sa ating value ng asset per accounting records, pero wala tayong equivalent adjustment made, no, for the tax purposes. So it would result to a taxable temporary difference. Another is if the carrying amount of investment in subsidiary or associate or joint venture is higher than the tax base because the subsidiary or the associate or the joint venture has not distributed, no, its entire income to the parent or investor. And lastly, no, if the cost of business combination that is accounted for as an acquisition is allocated to the identifiable assets acquired at fair value. So yun, magkaka or mag-i-increase, no, yung total assets ng company because of that acquisition na through business combination. So all of these items are not mga timing differences, but nevertheless they will result to a taxable temporary difference. So balik tayo dito, yun yung mga items, no, na ang accounting income is higher than the taxable income. So again, this will result to a deferred tax liability. So any items here, we can consider as mga taxable temporary differences. Then the other one, ito class, no, deferred tax asset. So, ibig sabihin, meron tayong deductible temporary difference. So, ito naman baliktad, no? Meron tayong deferred tax asset or meron tayong deductible temporary difference if the accounting income is lower naman, no, compared to taxable income. So, these are the items, no, na would result to a higher taxable income other than the accounting income. So, first, yung mga revenues and gains included in taxable income of current period, but are to be included pa in the accounting income for future periods. So like for example, your advance collection, no? So for tax purposes, it will already be added. It will be subjected already for tax, no? Isasama na yan sa taxable income kasi nakolekta mo na. Cash basis yung sa tax, no? Sa tax purposes. However, of course, for accounting, hindi mo pa yan, no, kahit naka-receive ka na ng cash, hindi mo pa siya dapat i-report as income for accounting purposes. Kasi nga, for us, kapag hindi pa na-render yung service, that's still, that advance payment is still a liability. So that's why, pag merong deferred revenue, that is actually a deductible temporary difference, which will result to a deferred tax asset. Also, some expenses and losses deducted from the accounting income in the current period but are deductible for tax purposes in the future period. So, dineduct na for accounting income purposes, pero hindi pa siya dineduct for tax purposes. So, it will follow or it will appear, no, that your taxable income is higher compared sa accounting income. So, since for tax purposes walang deduction, no, sa susunod pa siya i-deduct in the future periods pa. Pero under accounting income, diniduct na siya, no, in the computation of accounting income. So ito yung mga examples ng mga deductible temporary difference. You have your provision, you have your research cost na in-expense immediately for accounting purposes. You also have impairment loss and doubtful accounts. So here, Example yung provision class, no? For tax purposes niyan, hindi mo naman yan pwedeng or hindi mo yan pwedeng i-claim as deduction. Turn na natin siya re-recognize kung magka-cash out ka na. Kasi nga for tax purposes, considered expense lang yan pag meron ka ng kinash out. So, another is research cost na gi-expense immediately. So, for accounting purposes, gi-report na siya as research cost, no? Pero for tax purposes, hindi pa siyang i-deduct, no? So, next pa na mga future periods. So, the same also with impairment loss, no? And doubtful accounts. So, sa doubtful accounts, for example, gi-report na nato siya as expense, no, for accounting purposes, but for tax purposes, hindi siya muna mako-consider as expense, no, mag-intay ka pa na mara-write off na. So, yun yung mga items related to deductible temporary difference. So, we also have here mga other deductible temporary difference. So, we have downward revaluation of asset per accounting records. Ayan, pababa, no, yung ating asset. Tax base of the investment in subsidiary or associate or joint venture is higher than the carrying amount because of continuing losses in current and prior years. And lastly, the cost of business combination that is accounted for as an acquisition is allocated to the identifiable assets acquired at fair value. So yun, again, these are the transactions, no, which we can tag, which we can classify as mga deductible temporary difference, which will result to a deferred tax asset. Okay, so going back to this particular summary, kasi summary man ito, no? So, unahin na muna natin yung ating deferred tax liability. So, sabi niya dito, etong number 2 class saka yung number 3, this is applicable if you're using na the other method of accounting for deferred tax and deferred tax, no? Whether it's a liability or it's an asset. So, yung number 2 tsaka number 3, this is the method used in your statement or financial position na statement of financial position na method. No? So, yun yung isang method. So, dito, meron tayong deferred tax liability if the carrying amount daw of the asset is higher compared to its tax base. So, ang tax base class, depende na siya kung asset ba or liability. So, ano ba yung tax base? Tax base is, or the tax base is the amount of the asset or liability that is recognized or allowed for tax purposes. So, the tax base of an asset, take note, is the amount that will be deducted for tax purposes against future profit. So, yun yung tax base mo ng asset. And again, para result siya into a deferred tax liability, dapat when you compare the carrying amount of the asset and the tax base of the asset, dapat mas malaki ang carrying amount compared sa tax base. Kasi kung baliktad, like for example, yung carrying amount ng asset mo is lower than the tax base, then we consider that as a deductible temporary difference, which will result to a deferred tax asset. As regard to the liability naman, ito carrying amount of a liability. So there is a deferred tax liability if the carrying amount of a liability is lower than its tax base. So iba naman, no? Kung mas gamay na pod ang amount sa liability compared sa tax base. So the tax base of a liability is the carrying amount less the amount that will be deductible for tax purposes in the future. So that's our tax base kapag liability. So pag baliktad naman, if the carrying amount of a liability is higher than the tax base, so ibig sabihin meron tayong deductible temporary difference. So that will result to a deferred tax asset. Okay, so again, this will serve as our guide para mas madali nating analyze or ma-reconcile yung ating accounting income tsaka taxable income. So ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, we have two methods of accounting for income tax. So one is yung income statement approach. na ano siya class, no, mas ginagamit siya, especially in actual, yung magre-reconcile ka ng accounting income and the taxable income. So very ano ito, helpful because all you have to do is imo lang i-analyze na if you cannot memorize which transaction is considered taxable temporary difference or which item is considered as a deductible temporary difference. So dito, ang iisipin mo lang, no, na for example, pag ang accounting income ay mas malaki compared sa taxable income, ibig sabihin nun meron tayong deferred tax asset. Yan. So, dito sa income statement approach, parang ang i-imagine o i-analyze mo is anong impact doon sa ating accounting income. Kasi nga, ang sabi, if the accounting income is higher than the taxable income, so ibig sabihin, it will result to a deferred tax liability. So in short, meron tayong taxable temporary difference na sinatawag. Sige. So the other naman method, which is not very common, you have the statement of financial position approach. So this considers all temporary differences. So take note that past two requires the use of statement of financial position approach. No, pero pag magawa tayo, for example, ng reconciliation for ITR purposes, usually ginagamit is yung statement or yung income statement approach. This is how, or this is what you do when you account for income tax. No? So these are the procedures that you have to follow. So the first thing that you have to do is you determine the taxable income. So, pagkatapos mag-determine ng taxable income, pwede ka na mag-compute ng current tax expense. So, papaano ba no, yung computation na reconcile no, from our accounting income to taxable income? So, these are the adjustments to be made. No? So, una, for example, you start with your accounting income. Tapos, lahat ng mga non-deductible permanent differences, you just have to add them back. Tapos, yung mga non-taxable permanent differences, you have to deduct naman no, this mga permanent differences so that mako-compute mo yung accounting income subject to tax. So pag merong mga future deductible temporary differences, you just have to add them. Tapos pag merong mga future taxable temporary differences, then you have to deduct them para makuha natin yung taxable income. So pag may taxable income ka na, multiply mo lang sa current tax rate. Dapat current tax rate ito para makuha natin yung current tax expense. So you can utilize na this pro forma computation. So to record, no, kasi yung current natin, yan yung amount. So dito sa ating journal entry, so we are to recognize the income tax no for the current period. So ang term niya is current tax expense no or income tax expense. So you have here debit tayo ng income tax expense, credit tayo ng income tax payable. So after na tayong nag-compute or after nating mag-compute ng current tax expense, so pwede na tayong dumako sa susunod na step. No? So the next step would be to determine the taxable temporary difference. And then you multiply it by the applicable tax rate para meron na tayong deferred tax liability. So again, if you have already identified the mga differences, so mas madali na lang. Like, hanapin mo na lang. I say, for example, you are trying to recognize the deferred tax liability. So what you have to do is, if you have this na, so tingnan mo lang, magkano ba yung future taxable temporary differences. Kasi yung amount na yun yung i-multiply natin sa applicable na tax rate. So after determining the taxable temporary differences, so doon naman tayo sa isa. Determine naman natin yung deductible temporary difference naman. So yung deductible temporary difference, again, pwede mong makuha no, based doon sa yung previous na computation ng taxable income, assuming that you have already properly identified no, the different temporary differences. Yan. So, dito mo siya kukunin, no, yung amount na to. Multiply mo sa tax rate, no, para makuha mo ang tinatawag na income tax benefit. no? Kasi nga, ano yun, deferred tax asset yun. So, if you have already your total deductible temporary difference, you can just multiply it with the tax rate para makuha ang deferred tax asset. So, this will be your journal entry. So, lastly, mag-compute tayo ng total income tax expense. So, that includes the current tax expense. Based na siya sa taxable income. Tapos, in-add natin yung deferred tax expense and dineduct ang income tax benefit. So, yung deferred tax expense, galing yan sa mga taxable temporary difference. So, they will result or it will lead to this one, no, a deferred tax expense. So, if you're going to deduct your income tax benefit, so you have already total income tax expense. Or if you're asked of the total income tax expense, you can just simply multiply counting income natin subject to tax. So, dapat subject to tax ito times the rate equals your total income tax. So, in terms of presentation, paano ba natin ipipresent? Na yung deferred tax asset mo, that's a non-current asset. Deferred tax liability, that's a non-current liability. Can we offset the deferred tax asset versus the deferred tax liability? So, as per past 1, no, hindi siya po pwedeng i-offset, no, unless permitted by another standard. So, ang another standard is yung past 12, no? Kasi sinasabi ng past 12, pwedeng mag-offset for as long as they relate to income taxes levied by the same taxing authority. So, pwedeng mag-offset na kung same lang sila o taxing authority. Number 2, the entity has a legal enforceable right to offset current tax asset against current tax liability.
So let us discuss the problems. So we have here the first problem. Pat Company reported a pre-tax accounting income of 5 million for the current year. So the following items are included in the determination of accounting income. So we have an estimated litigation loss, which will become tax deductible when settled in the future for 300,000. We also have dividend received, net of final tax na 100,000, and revenue from installment sale, which will be recognized as taxable income, is received over the next 3 years for 600,000. So we also have our income tax rate of 30%. So what amount should be reported as current tax expense for the current year? So in order to answer this problem, what you have to do is convert first. No, let's compute first our taxable income. So yung accounting income natin, i-convert natin into taxable income. So here you can utilize the pro forma computation that we had earlier. So you start with your accounting income. If there are non-deductible permanent differences, then you have to add them. If there are non-taxable permanent differences, then you have to deduct them for us to be able to compute our accounting income subject to tax. So in this problem, we do not have a non-deductible permanent difference, but ang meron lang tayo is a non-taxable permanent difference. So itong dividend received, net of final tax na 100,000, so this is not taxable anymore since nakapag withhold na yung corporation na nagbayad ng dividends na to. So hindi na ito masasubject to income tax. So that's why we're deducting it from our accounting income because yung 5 million na yan, that includes your 100,000 dividend received. No, kasi nireport yan as dividend income. Now, this will be our accounting income subject to tax, so 4.9 million. So after that, we will deal with those naman mga temporary differences. So as you know, the future deductible temporary differences should be added to our accounting income subject to tax, whereas future taxable temporary differences should be deducted from our accounting income subject to tax. So in our problem, yung estimated litigation loss is a deductible temporary difference because for tax purposes, hindi pa siya pwedeng i-deduct. It will become deductible lang when it is to be settled in the future. So kung magka-cash out ka na in relation to this litigation loss. So therefore, this is a deductible temporary difference. So we have to add it, no, sa ating accounting income subject to tax. The other one naman, yung revenue from installment sale. So ito, mare-receive pa natin siya in the next or in the future years, no, for the next 3 years. So therefore, for accounting purposes kasi, na-report na yan, part na ng accounting income kasi nakapag-deliver na tayo ng goods. So it's already considered as earned. Pero for tax purposes, only when the cash will be received, no? That's the time when you have to recognize or you have to include it as part of your taxable income. So therefore, this is a taxable temporary difference. So we have to add, we have to deduct, no, that taxable temporary difference. So after considering, no, the future deductible temporary differences and the taxable temporary differences, na-compute natin yung ating taxable income. So you have 4.6 million. So the basis of our current tax expense na will be itong taxable income natin. So i-multiply lang natin siya with our income tax rate na 30%. So mako-compute na natin yung ating current tax expense na at 1,380,000. So for this problem, yung answer natin is letter A. So just to continue this problem, no, para mabuo natin yung paano pag-account, no, including the deferred deferred taxes, no. So may that be a deferred tax asset or a deferred tax liability. So before muna that, no, let's have muna the journal entry of your current tax expense. So this will be your journal entry to record no, your current tax expense. So just simply debit income tax expense and credit income tax liability. So income tax liability mo, this is a current liability. Now, after that, we have to consider those mga future deductible temporary differences and future taxable temporary differences. So pick up lang natin no, yung ating future deductible temporary difference na 300,000. It will actually result to an income tax benefit. No, ultimately, you have to report a deferred tax asset in relation to that deductible temporary difference. So in this case, yung 300,000 natin, binultiply lang natin by 30%. So meron tayong income tax benefit na amounting to 90,000. So if you are to record that, that's a deferred tax asset of 90,000 and a credited income tax benefit for 90,000. So yung deferred tax asset natin, this is a non-current asset. Tapos yung income tax benefit naman natin, this is an income account. So you have to offset this, no? You have to deduct this from your income tax expense, no? Para makuha natin yung ating net, yung tinatawag na total income tax expense. So isa yan sa mga i-consider natin para ma-compute natin yung total income tax expense natin. Now, for the taxable temporary differences, so what you have to do is, ganun lang din, you have to just multiply it with the applicable tax rate. So in this case, that's 600,000 times 180,000 times 30%. So meron tayong 180,000. So that, ito yung ating journal entry to record our deferred tax liability, no, as a result of your taxable temporary difference. So you have a debit to income tax expense and a credit to deferred tax liability. So income tax expense, of course, it's an profit or loss account, no? Kasama yan sa pag-compute ng total income tax expense natin. Whereas your deferred tax liability, this is a non-current liability. So if you will be asked magkano yung total income tax expense, so this will be your total income tax expense. Or if ang tanong is magkano yung net deferred tax expense, for example, so you just have to get the difference of your income tax benefit and your income tax expense, no, as a result of your taxable temporary difference. So you will have here your net deferred taxes will be 90,000. Okay? Tapos yung total income tax expense natin, so consider na natin yung current tax expense, no, minus your income tax benefit, then you add your income tax expense. So you will have here our total income tax expense of 1,470,000. For the next problem, parang ganun lang din, no? Na we have to compute for the question here is to compute for the total income tax expense. So for us to be able to do that, so we have to analyze first, no, the items na nalista dito kasi we have to convert your accounting income to taxable income. So start tayo with our accounting income na 5 million. So meron tayong non-taxable na permanent difference. So in this form, itong proceeds received from the life insurance on the death of the officer. So this is a non-taxable permanent difference. So dinideduct natin para makuha natin yung ating accounting income subject to tax. So actually, if we will no longer, or if yung question is yung total income tax expense lang, pwede na nga dito na tayo, no, hanggang dito na lang tayo magko-compute. Kasi yung accounting income subject to tax mo, pag i-multiply mo yan ng tax rate, it will give you already the total income tax expense. So if we will use that, no, computation para mas madali, no? So it will still arrive at the same answer. That's 1,350,000. So ito yung ating total income tax expense. But for discussion purposes, no, let us just consider also the mga deductible temporary differences and taxable temporary differences. So items that could affect or could have impact, no, or would lead us to the recognition of deferred taxes. So to continue, yun lang din yung gagawin. Hahanapin lang muna natin. Let's analyze mga items na na-include dito kung ma-classify ba sila as deductible or taxable na temporary difference. So for example, yung depreciation daw deducted for tax purposes in excess of book depreciation. So in short, mas malaki yung depreciation for tax purposes as compared to book depreciation. So this is a taxable temporary difference. So yan, no, yung excess depreciation. Considered yan as taxable temporary difference. Now, cash received included in accounting income of which 120,000 will be taxable next year. So in short, of the 200,000, 120,000 of that will still be taxable next year. So mas malaki yung accounting income mo compared to taxable income. So therefore, this is also future taxable temporary difference. So the total future taxable temporary differences would be 320,000. So if we're going to deduct that from our income, or from our accounting income subject to tax, so you will get this amount. Now, this is your taxable income. You have 4,180,000. So kung i-multiply natin yung ating tax rate, so mako-compute natin yung ating current na tax expense. So that's 1,254,000. So if you wish to recognize that, so this will be your entry. Tapos for your income tax, no, na expense, or should I say your deferred, no, tax expense. So that's 320,000, your taxable temporary difference times your 30%. So you have 96,000. So this will increase, no, your current tax expense. So still, no, your total income tax expense will be 1,350,000. So it is just the same with what we have computed kanina. So pag ang tanong ay total income tax expense lang, so pwede na, no, automatic, or you just can directly multiply your accounting income subject to tax, no, times the applicable tax rate. So we have here another problem. So ito siya, it's asking for the current tax expense for the current year. So ganun lang din yung ating gagawin. So start tayo with our accounting income. Then let us identify what are those items here which are mga permanent differences. So in the problem, sabi niya, included daw in the other income was 200,000 of interest revenue from government bonds held by the entity. So if you can still recall, pag government bonds yan, exempted ka from payment of taxes. So that's why this one is a non-taxable permanent difference which we have to deduct para makuha natin yung accounting income natin subject to tax. So which is 6 million. So pagkatapos nun, we just have to analyze each of the temporary differences para ma-determine natin whether they are future deductible temporary difference ba or future taxable ba siya na temporary difference. So in our problem, so naka-mention siya dito that the income statement daw, the depreciation expense, meron siyang 500,000 for accounting income. Ang ni-report niya is 500,000 but in the income tax return, yung ni-report niya ay 600,000. So there's a difference of 100,000. So mas malaki ngayon ang tax, ang depreciation expense na ni-report for tax purposes compared to the depreciation expense na ni-report for accounting purposes. So therefore, meron tayong taxable temporary difference in the amount of 100,000. So if you want to compute for the taxable income, so deduct lang natin yung amount na yun sa ating income subject to tax. So in this case, you have 5.9 million. So if the question is current lang na tax expense, you simply multiply that by 30% to get our current tax expense na 1,770,000. So this will be our entry. So just to continue, yung ating income tax expense or ating deferred tax expense in relation to your taxable temporary difference. So that's 100,000 times 30%. So meron tayong dagdag na income tax, na 30,000. So that's why your total income tax expense will become 1.8 million. So ito yung ating entry to record our deferred tax liability. So as a result of your taxable temporary difference. So lastly, this is our last problem para sa income statement approach ng pag-compute or pag-account ng ating deferred taxes. So we have here Viking Company reported in the income statement for the year ended December 31, 2019, pre-tax income of 1 million. So ito na yung ating pre-tax income. So meron tayong mga items which we have to analyze kung ano ba siya, temporary, taxable ba siya na difference or deductible siya na difference or permanent ba siya na difference. So yung rent income natin, so kung titingnan natin, mas malaki yung tax return compared, mas malaki yung accounting record compared to the tax record. So if you're going to go back to our guide, sabi niya pag mas malaki ang accounting income compared sa taxable income, then meron tayong taxable temporary difference. So kaya kinonsider natin siya dito sa baba. Yung depreciation naman, mas malaki yung tax return compared sa accounting record. So it will appear that since you have reported a bigger amount of depreciation in your tax return, ibig sabihin nun, mas maliit yung i-report mong taxable income for yung taxable income mo, mas maliit compared sa accounting income mo. So therefore, mas malaki pa rin yung accounting record or accounting income compared to taxable income. So that's why we are considering it also, plinat natin siya under your taxable temporary difference, yung 60,000 na difference. Another is premium on officer's life insurance. So that one is a non-deductible na permanent difference. So hindi natin siya pwedeng i-deduct for tax purposes. But for accounting, na-deduct na yan. So that's why we are adding it back. Okay, so after analyzing all of those items, pwede na tayo mag-compute. This is our accounting income subject to tax. Wala tayong future deductible temporary differences. Meron tayong future taxable temporary differences, a total of 110,000. So ito yung ating taxable income, 980,000. So if yung question niya, current provision for income tax, you'll just simply multiply that by 30% para makuha natin yung ating current tax expense. So ganito yung ating entry, no, para sa ating current tax expense. So to address our question here, the answer would be letter A, no, 294,000. To continue, no, yung ating namang taxable temporary difference, no, if we're going to multiply that by 30%, makukuha natin yung deferred tax expense natin, no, or yung item na magre-result or yung amount na magre-result to deferred tax liability. So that's 33,000. So considering also this deferred taxes, your total income tax expense will be this much, 327,000. Okay, so we're done with the income statement approach. So let's go back to the slides, no, for the statement of financial position approach. So this is the other approach, no, or method of accounting for your deferred taxes, yung statement of financial position approach. So kung sa income statement approach, yung ating analysis is nakatuon kung ano yung mas malaki, accounting income ba or taxable income ba. Dito naman sa statement of financial position approach, what we will compare, no, are the carrying amount of our asset or liability versus its tax base, no, so of our assets and liabilities. So that is why ito yung ating approach, no, ito yung ating steps. If you're going to account for your deferred taxes using the statement of financial position approach. So for the first step, you have to determine muna yung tax base of your assets and your liabilities. No, so balikan lang natin ano nga ba yung tax base, no, ng ating asset tsaka ng ating liability. So as mentioned, ang tax base natin kapag asset is the amount that will be deductible for tax purposes against future profits. So magkano yung amount na pwede mong i-deduct for tax purposes against future profit. Whereas yung tax base naman ng liability, it's the carrying amount of your liability less the amount that will be deductible for tax purposes in the future. So yun yung tax base ng liability. Just in case hindi siya ibibigay, no, in the problem. Yung ikaw pa yung ikaw pa ang mag-determine ng tax base ng asset at saka ng liability. So ito yung ating magiging basihan, no, kung paano natin i-determine yung tax base natin. So pag meron ka ng tax base, so what you have to do is just compare, no, yung carrying amount mo na naka-reflect sa statement of financial position versus yung na-determine mo na tax base. So yung difference between the carrying amount and the tax base will result to either a deferred tax asset or a deferred tax liability. So kung babalikan natin yung ating summary, no, ating guide, no, in determining whether meron tayong deferred tax asset or deferred tax liability, so ganito yung magiging itsura. No? Ito yung ating guide. So as mentioned, yung number 2 tsaka number 3 dito, these are our guide if guides natin ito if you are using the statement of financial position approach. So meron tayong deferred tax liability kung ang carrying amount daw ng asset is higher than its tax base. Or if the carrying amount of a liability is lower than its tax base. So it will result to a deferred tax liability. So pwede na ang i-remember mo na lang is yung sa deferred tax liability kasi pagbaliktad nun, ibig sabihin deferred tax asset na. Like for example, dito, ang carrying amount ng asset is higher than the tax base. So that's a deferred tax liability. No? It will result to a deferred tax liability. So in short, yung difference na yun ay i-consider mo as taxable temporary difference. Pero kung baliktad naman, kung carrying amount ng asset mo is lower than the tax base, so ibig sabihin nun, the difference is considered as a deductible temporary difference, which will result to a deferred tax asset. So pag liability naman, kung ang carrying amount ng liability is lower than the tax base, then it is considered as a taxable temporary difference. So ultimately, will result to a deferred tax liability. Pagbaliktad nun, pag ang carrying amount ng liability is mas mataas compared sa tax-based, so ang difference naman na yun ay i-consider natin as a deductible temporary difference, which will later result to a deferred tax asset. We have to always remember na yung mga permanent differences will not give rise to a deferred tax asset or deferred tax liability. So after na-compute mo na yung taxable temporary difference mo, tsaka yung deductible temporary difference, so multiply mo lang yung ating tax rate, no, applicable tax rate natin. So para ma-compute mo yung deferred tax asset tsaka deferred tax liability. So for the end or at the end of that particular accounting period. So after that, no, i-compare mo siya, no, i-determine natin yung beginning and ending balance of the deferred tax asset or liability. Tapos yung difference nun, yung na-compute mo ngayon versus the beginning deferred tax asset or liability. So yung difference nun, i-recognize natin as your income tax expense or income tax benefit. So ang mangyayari ay na-compute mo na yung ending balance. No? Alam mo na yung dapat i-reflect mo as deferred tax asset or deferred tax liability sa statement of financial position mo. So ang kulang na lang ngayon is magkano kaya yung i-adjust nating amount, no, para makuha yung total income tax expense. So what you have to do is, yun, i-compare mo lang yung ending balance sa beginning balance. So for example, yung deferred tax liability mo ay tumaas. So compared mo, mas dako ang deferred tax liability compared sa ang beginning na deferred tax liability. So meaning, you have to recognize no additional income tax expense and of course, the related deferred tax liability. So parang ang gusto lang nating mangyari is that i-increase mo yung deferred tax liability. So gagawa ka ng adjustment based doon sa kung magkano dapat ang balanse ng deferred tax asset mo tsaka deferred tax liability. So this is our practice problem for the statement of financial position approach. So in this problem, we are just given the different accounts. So we have already our accounts receivable, and we are given the carrying amount as well as the tax base of our account. No? So meron siyang accounts receivable, motor vehicle, provision for warranty, deposit received in advance. So what I did here is plinat ko lang muna yung mga accounts with their corresponding carrying amounts and tax base. Pagkatapos, kinuha ko yung difference. No? Inaisa-isa natin siya. So, kinuha yung difference. So, after that, yung difference na na-compute natin, let's classify them. Kung taxable ba sila na temporary difference or deductible ba sila na temporary difference. Like for example, ito, accounts receivable, ang carrying amount niya ay 1.5 or 1,500,000. Tax base niya is 1,750,000. So based on sa guide, ang sabi niya, if the carrying amount of your asset is higher than the tax base, then there is, the result will be a deferred tax liability. So otherwise, deferred tax asset yun, considered as deductible temporary difference. So dito class, mas malaki ang tax base compared sa carrying amount. So therefore, yung 250,000 natin na difference is considered a deductible temporary difference. So another thing, yung motor vehicle niya, carrying amount is 1,650,000, tax base is 1,250,000. So motor vehicle is an asset. So again, according to our guide, if the carrying amount is greater than the tax base, then there is a tax or deferred tax liability. So yung 400,000 dito, we consider it, no? We classify it as a taxable temporary difference because the carrying amount of your asset is greater than the tax base. Provision for warranty is a liability. So according to our guide, no, if the carrying amount of the liability is lower than the tax base, then we have a taxable temporary difference. Otherwise, meron tayong deductible temporary difference. So in this case, mas malaki ang carrying amount compared sa tax base. And take note again, this is a liability. So therefore, yung 120,000 na difference, we consider that as our deductible temporary difference. The same also with deposit received in advance. So this is a liability, right? This is an earned income. So since the carrying amount is greater than the tax base, so parehas lang siya sa provision for warranty. Ibig sabihin nito, itong 150,000 na difference na to, we classify it as a deductible temporary difference. Okay? So after that, we just get the total. No? Ito yung total ng taxable temporary difference natin. Ito yung total ng deductible temporary difference natin. Okay? So since yung tanong ay magkano daw ang i-report na deferred tax liability, so we simply multiply yung deferred, yung taxable temporary difference natin by the applicable tax rate, which is 30%. No? So yung deferred tax liability natin is 120,000. So just to continue, no, since na-compute na rin natin yung total temporary differences, so if ever you'll be asked to compute for the deferred tax asset, you simply multiply that amount by 30%. So para makuha natin yung deferred tax asset natin, in this case, that amounts to 156,000. Proceed tayo sa next problem. So this is West Company. So yung binigay sa atin dito mga carrying amounts ng asset tsaka ng liability. So plinat lang niya lahat. So what I did here is plinat ko lang din lahat ng mga carrying amounts ko. Tapos nag-determine tayo ng tax base. Okay? So bibase yan natin dito sa ating additional information. So for example here, the value though for tax purposes for property and for plant and equipment was 7 million and 4 million. So yung tax base ng property, 7 million. Yung tax base ng plant and equipment, 4 million. So the entity has made a provision for inventory obsolescence for 2 million, which is not allowable for tax purposes. So ibig sabihin, itong inventory dito sa carrying amount natin is already net of the inventory or the allowance for inventory obsolescence. No? Meron na siyang allowance for inventory write-down na 2 million. So hindi yun in-acknowledge, no, ng for tax purposes. And that is why our tax base here, no, dinagdag ko, no, binalik ko yung 2 million kasi nga hindi daw siya allowed, no, hindi siya allowed for tax purposes. So yung trade receivables naman, ang nakalista dito, meron tayong 3 million. Pero ang sabi, no, there was an impairment loss against the trade receivables amounting to 1 million. So as we know, yung impairment loss na yan, hindi rin yan siya allowable, no, as deduction for tax purposes. So what I did is inad ko siya, no, na 1 million. Then for the trade payables and the cash, wala namang na-mention. So that's why my tax base would be the same. So in short, kung walang na-mention na difference, the same lang ang amount ng the same lang, no, ang carrying amount sa tax base niya. So yan. So after that, no, I determine the difference. No, ito yung mga differences. So same process lang. If these are the differences na, I am going to determine na lang, identify whether this difference, this temporary difference ba, is a taxable temporary difference or a deductible temporary difference. So for example, dito, property. So the carrying amount is 10 million, tax base is 7 million. So sabi natin, again, based sa guide, if the carrying amount of the asset is greater or higher than the tax base, then we have a deferred tax liability. So itong 3 million na to, we classify it as a taxable temporary difference. So what about your plant and equipment? The same thing, no? Mas malaki ang carrying amount compared sa tax base. So therefore, that difference of 1 million is also a taxable temporary difference. Dito naman sa inventory, kung titingnan natin, carrying amount is lower than the tax base. So kung tingnan natin sa guide natin, pag ganito, kung baliktad, no? We have a deferred tax asset. So itong 2 million na difference, this is considered as a deductible temporary difference. Tapos, sa trade receivable, ganun din, mas maliit ang carrying amount compared sa tax base. So yung difference ng 1 million, consider natin siya as deductible temporary difference. So no differences na for trade payables saka for cash. So ito yung summary. Yung taxable temporary difference natin ay 4 million. Whereas yung deductible temporary difference is 3 million. Okay? So if the question is deferred tax expense, so you just multiply yung 30% natin by the taxable temporary difference of 4 million para makuha natin yung deferred tax expense natin na 1.2 million. If we may continue, no, the deductible temporary differences amounts to 3 million. So if you're going to multiply that by 30%, you will get your income tax benefit of 900,000. Okay? So if the question is net deferred taxes, no? So, or net deferred tax expense. So your answer would be 1.2 million minus 900,000. So that will be 300,000. Pero yung question niya is yung deferred tax expense daw. So yung answer natin will be 1.2. Pero if what was being asked is the net deferred tax expense, so our answer would be 300,000. So net already of the income tax benefit. So for the last problem, ito mas comprehensive siya kasi binigay din yung ating accounting income. So we can account, no, for the whole, you can account for the whole total income tax expense. Kasi meron siyang, pwede mo ma-compute yung ating current na tax expense. Kasi nga may binigay siya na accounting income, which could be our starting point in computing for our taxable income. So, before anything else, no, before tayong magpunta sa pag-compute ng taxable income, so siguro mag-start muna tayo with our analysis, no, kung ano bang meron, kung ang differences ba, ang temporary differences ba ay considered taxable temporary difference or a deductible temporary difference. So for this example, or for this problem, computer software niya, so ito binigay na, no, carrying amount, tax base, saka yung difference. So yan, carrying amount daw ng computer software ay 4 million. Ang tax base niya ay 0, so ang difference ay 4 million. So as you can see here, the carrying amount is greater than the tax base. So ito siya, this will result to a deferred tax liability. So this difference is classified as a taxable temporary difference. Yung equipment niya, 15 million yung carrying amount, tax base is 12 million. So there's a difference of 3 million. So itong 3 million na difference na to, since mas malaki din ang carrying amount compared sa tax base, this is also a taxable temporary difference kasi it will result to a deferred tax liability. Then for our accrued liability, so mas malaki ang carrying amount natin compared sa tax base. So pag ganun, we have a deductible temporary difference. So again, balikan lang natin yung guide natin para mas madali itong pag-analyze natin or pag-determine natin whether the difference is a taxable difference or temporary difference ba or a deductible temporary difference. So, yung mga additional information na to sa baba, Mga explanation na lang yan, no? Dito sa mga percent niyang amount. Like for example, the first bullet there is talking about the computer software na bakit kaya yung computer software niya carrying amount is 4 million, tax fees is 0. Kasi ang total pala ng computer software, no, yung development ng computer software product is 6 million. So the software cost was capitalized for accounting purposes. So i-amortize niya lang yan for 3 years daw. So yung 6 million, i-amortize niya for 3 years. So every year, yung amortization niya is 2 million. However, for tax purposes daw, the whole amount of 6 million was reported as expense. No? Claim niya na lahat as expense. So that is why wala ka ng future deductible, no, na difference. Wala ka ng future na deductible. So your tax base would be 0 na. So kasi wala ka ng aasahan in the future. So your tax base is 0. For the second bullet naman, it is related to the equipment. So na-plot na rin yung ating carrying amount tsaka yung tax base. Pero if you want, no, to know, bakit ganun? Bakit carrying amount niya 15 million? Bakit yung tax base niya is 12 million? So ito yung mag-explain kung bakit 15 million yung carrying amount tsaka kung bakit 12 million yung tax base. So sabi niya dito yung equipment daw was acquired for 20 million. So ito yung acquisition cost talaga, no, ng ating equipment. For accounting, dinepreciate siya using straight line, no? For 4 years daw. So each year, that's 20 million divided 4. So that's 5 million each year. So for 2017, nag-depreciate na siya ng 5 million. So that's why, for accounting purposes, 15 million na lang yung carrying amount. Pero for tax purposes daw, gamitin daw niya is yung SYD, no, for tax purposes. So kung if you try to compute the depreciation using SYD, for sure it will turn out that the depreciation expense, no, pag SYD yung ginamit ay 8 million. So kaya dito sa tax base natin, 12 million na lang kasi yan na lang yung amount na deductible pa in the future. Lastly, yung accrued liability. So ito naman yung information related to accrued liability, that there was an agreement, no, with the employees to provide healthcare benefits, and then the total cost of the plan was 2 million. So of course, for for accounting purposes, i-report man talaga natin as liability yung 2 million. Kasi i-accrue na natin, no, kasi nag-promise na. Pero for tax purposes, hindi mo pa yan siya pwedeng i-deduct, no? Wala pang pwedeng i-deduct na expense in relation to that healthcare na expense. So therefore, for tax base, no, kasi liability, so ang sabi, ang tax base daw ng liability ay ang carrying amount minus the amount that will be deductible for tax purposes in the future. So yung carrying amount niya is 2 million. Tapos yung amount na i-deductible in the future would also be 2 million. So that's why the tax base here is 0. So at least, no, the good thing about this problem is you're already given the tax base para hindi ka na maproblema pag-compute. What you have to do is just to determine whether this difference ba is a taxable difference or a deductible temporary difference. Okay? So yun yung mga explanation as to galing or saan galing itong carrying amount natin tsaka yung tax base. So the last bullet is telling us, no, the pre-tax accounting income for 2017 was 13 million. And the applicable tax rate is 30%. Tapos wala pang deferred taxes sa January 1, 2017, which is good, no, kasi wala tayong pagkukumparahan pa ng ating mako-compute na deferred tax asset tsaka deferred tax liability ngayon. So meaning yung deferred tax asset natin will just be equivalent, no, to the income tax benefit, or yung deferred tax liability natin may equivalent lang din sa deferred tax expense natin. Ito na determine na natin, no, na kung anong klaseng temporary difference yung ating mga na-identify na temporary differences. So ito, taxable, because the carrying amount is greater than the tax base. Ito din, taxable for the same reason. Mas malaki yung carrying amount compared sa tax base. Ito naman, liability ito. So since mas malaki ang carrying amount kasi sa tax base, then meron tayong deductible na temporary difference. So this is your total taxable temporary difference. So if you're going to multiply your taxable temporary difference by 30%, you will get your deferred tax expense. Again, considering na wala naman tayong beginning balances no, sa deferred tax liability and deferred tax asset. Whereas your deductible temporary differences has a total of 2 million. So if you're going to multiply that by 30%, your income tax benefit would also be 600,000. So let's try to address muna the questions no, na nandito sa ating problem. So the first question was to compute for the current tax expense no, for the current year. So we know that para ma-compute natin yung current tax expense, kailangan nating makuha no, yung ating taxable na income, no, yung taxable income natin. So to do that, no, let's start with our accounting income, which is given no, 13 million. Tapos wala naman dito information about mga mga permanent differences. So we'll just account for our mga deductible temporary differences and your taxable temporary differences. So the same lang gihapon no, sa ato ang income statement approach that deductible temporary differences will be added and taxable temporary differences will be deducted for us to compute the taxable income. So in this case, deductible temporary differences will be added is 2 million. Taxable temporary differences which will be deducted is 7 million. So your taxable income is 8 million. So if you're going to multiply that by 30%, we have already our tax or current tax expense. Okay, so if you're going to consider your deferred tax expense and your income tax benefit, mako-compute na natin yung ating total tax expense, no, which is in sa number 3.9 million. Or pwede rin, no, if you have already this accounting income, since wala naman tayong permanent differences, ibig sabihin yung accounting income natin is ito na rin yung accounting income natin subject to tax. So pwede na diretso ka na lang dito. No? Kung yung question lang naman is total tax expense, so pwede na diretso ka na, mag-multiply ka ng 30%. So if that's 13 million times 30%, so that's 3.9. So that's your total tax expense. So it's just the same. Para ma-compute mo na agad yung number 3, tapos nagmamadali ka. So you just multiply. Use na lang your accounting income subject to tax. So in this case, the same lang siya sa accounting income natin kasi wala ngang permanent differences na na-mention. Okay, so for number 2 na question, it's asking for the net deferred tax expense. So net deferred tax expense, as we have mentioned kanina, yung difference lang ng deferred tax expense natin, tsaka yung income tax benefit natin. So that's 1.5 million. Okay, so that's letter B. 1.5 billion. Let us have one more problem. This is just to illustrate no, what do we do if the temporary difference is a result of an upward revaluation. So ano ba yung ating dapat na gawin, no? Or how do we account for it? So in this problem, on January 1, 2018, EC Company acquired an equipment for 8 million. So the equipment was depreciated using the straight line method based on a useful life of 8 years with no residual value. On January 1, 2021, after 3 years, the equipment was revalued at a replacement cost of 12 million with no change in the useful life. The pre-tax accounting income before depreciation was 10 million for 2021. The income tax rate is 25%, and there are no other temporary differences at the beginning of the year. How much is the income tax expense to be reported in the income statement for 2021? So if we're going to prepare the revaluation, or if you're going to account for the revaluation, this will be our computations. So we have here our equipment at cost and at the replacement cost. So this will be your appreciation. We compute for the related accumulated depreciation. So for the cost, since it was depreciated for 8 years now, and then it was purchased 2018 pa, so meaning the age of this equipment is 3 years already. So 18, 19, then 20. So we have 3 years. So the accumulated depreciation is 3 million. So if you're going to compute the same depreciation using the replacement cost, ito yung ating computation. So you will have 4.5 million. So therefore, mag-i-increase yung ating accumulated depreciation by 1.5 million. So ito yung mga balances natin. Ito yung carrying amount, using of course the cost. Ito yung ating sound value or tinatawag na depreciated replacement cost. Tsaka this is our revaluation surplus. So if you are going to recognize our revaluation, so this will be our entry. So we debit equipment, we credit accumulated depreciation at 1.5 million, and we credit revaluation surplus at 2.5 million. Now, if you're going to take into consideration the effect of this revaluation surplus to deferred taxes, so take note that this revaluation surplus would result, itong upward revaluation na ito, itong recognition ng revaluation surplus, this will result to a deferred tax liability. So, if we are to recognize a deferred tax liability, yung 2.5 million na na-report natin as revaluation surplus, multiply lang natin siya class by 25%, which is our tax rate. So, in that case, meron tayong deferred tax liability amounting to 625,000. So unlike doon sa mga temporary differences which is caused by mga timing differences, dito sa taxable temporary differences that arise because of the upward revaluation, because of the recognition of revaluation surplus. So yung i-debit natin na account ay hindi income tax expense, kundi revaluation surplus. So yung deferred tax liability natin, i-charge natin siya sa revaluation surplus. So ibig sabihin, kung titingnan natin yung net lang talaga na revaluation surplus na i-report natin after the recognition of the deferred tax liability would only be 1,875,000. So yun lang yung net amount ng revaluation surplus natin, So yan lang 1,875,000. So the next entry is related to the subsequent depreciation. So after the revaluation, so that's just your sound value of 7.5 million. You divide it by the remaining useful life of the equipment, which is 5 years. So you have 1.5 million. So the last entry here pertains to our revaluation surplus. So again, dapat pala 2.5 million divide minus 625,000. So dapat 18750 pala ito. 18755,000. So divide 5 years, 1,875,000 divide 5 years. So yung ating piecemeal realization para sa revaluation surplus natin na natira, which is 1,875,000, is 375,000. Okay? So we're done with accounting for the revaluation, yung pag-recognize natin ng revaluation surplus. And of course, the subsequent na mga transactions, including subsequent depreciation and the piecemeal realization of our revaluation surplus. Now, if you'll try to compute for our taxable income, so ito yung gagawin natin. Given na yung given na yung accounting income daw before depreciation for 2021, So as mentioned, 10 million yung ating taxable or yung ang ating accounting income before depreciation and tax. So i-consider natin yung um, depreciation for tax purposes. So for tax purposes, take note, hindi na-report ito, no? Hindi na-report yung upward revaluation. So hindi na-report na nag-revalue na tayo ng asset, no? From 5 million, ginawa na natin 7.5 yung clearing amount. So hindi yan na-report sa BIR. So for BIR purposes, yung kanilang pagbabasehan is yun pa rin dati, no? Which is based on the cost, no? Yung 5 million natin, divide natin by 5 years. So pag 1 million each pa rin, no? Pag 1 million depreciation pa rin per year. So yan. So yung taxable income natin would be 9 million. So yung 9 million na yan, if you're going to multiply that by 25%, makukuha natin yung ating current na tax expense. So ito yung current tax expense natin, and if you are to report or if you're to recognize your journal entry, ito yung entry mo. Debit ka ng income tax expense, 2,250,000. Credit ka ng income tax payable na 2,250,000. Now, what about the computation of your deferred tax liability? Okay, so here we just have to establish kung magkano yung carrying amount natin, no? Kung magkano na per book natin, and magkano ang yung binasihan, no, per tax for tax purposes. So again, yung carrying amount, this reflects already our revalued amount, no, yung revaluation or yung ating depreciated replacement cost na, whereas itong dito na column, itong tax base, nagbase pa ito sa old natin na carrying amount, no, prior to our revaluation. Okay, so we have here your equipment at carrying amount on revaluation date. So what I did is I just based the amounts here doon sa ating computation ng revaluation surplus. So you have itong cost na column na 5 million. So plinat ko siya as our tax base. Whereas yung carrying amount naman, kasi ito na yung records natin, di ba? Ito na yung magre-reflect sa ating books. So yun yung ni-report ko dito under sa carrying amount. That's actually the sound value after the revaluation. So after that, dineduct natin yung subsequent depreciation. So para sa carrying amount, if you can still see here, na our depreciation subsequent to the revaluation is 1.5 million. So yun yung tinake up natin dito sa carrying amount. Pero for tax purposes, again, kasi hindi nga na-report yung increase, no, yung revaluation for tax purposes. So yung pinagbasihan natin ng depreciation is yung 5 million pa rin, divide 5 years. No? So yung 1 million pa. So it turned out that the carrying amount of this equipment is 6 billion. So yan yung balanse na meron tayo sa books natin after the revaluation and after the subsequent depreciation. Whereas yung tax base natin is only 4 million. So ibig sabihin meron tayong taxable temporary difference na 2 million. So yung taxable temporary difference na yan, multiply lang natin siya class by 25%. So para makuha natin kung magkano na ang deferred tax liability as of December 31, 2021. So ito na yung updated dapat na balanse natin ng deferred tax liability pagdating ng year-end. Now, kung titingnan natin sa previous natin na journal entries, nag-report na tayo na nag-recognize na tayo ng deferred tax liability in the amount of 625,000. So, sa ating record, sa books natin, meron na tayong deferred tax liability na 625,000. Pero considering all of the subsequent depreciation, we have computed that the updated, no, the ending balance of the deferred tax liability should have been or should be 500,000. So with that, meron tayong decrease, no, in the deferred tax liability in the amount of 125,000. So dapat i-record natin yan, no? So yung ating decrease in the deferred tax liability, debit natin yung deferred tax liability natin para yung 625,000 magiging 500,000 na lang. So debit natin yung 125,000 and i-credit natin yung income tax expense na. So take note in the subsequent computation or in the subsequent adjustment that we will make in our deferred tax liability, babato na natin sa income tax expense or sa income tax benefit. So yung first time lang na pag-report ng ating deferred tax liability because of the revaluation surplus, yun lang yung i-charge natin sa revaluation surplus. Pero subsequent to that, yung updating niya, so either income tax expense na nadagdagan or yung income tax expense mo mababawasan, no? Because merong decrease in the deferred tax liability. Okay, so after this adjusting entry or after this entry, dapat yung balance ng deferred tax liability natin is maging 500,000. Okay? So punta na naman tayo sa income statement presentation for 2021. So ito yung ating income before tax or before depreciation and tax. So if you're going to consider what we have reported here, itong ating depreciation, using the revalued amount, 1.5 na yung ating depreciation na na-report. So income tax natin after depreciation but before, or yung income natin after depreciation but before tax is 8.5 million. So if you're going to or if you're going to deduct the income tax expense, which is composed of your current tax expense na 2,250,000 as what we have computed kanina, tapos yung decrease in the deferred tax liability of 125,000. So yung ating income tax expense, yung total income tax expense natin for 2021 is 2,125,000. Okay? So take note class na itong balance na to, 2,125,000, you can check if this is correct by multiplying, kasi dapat itong pag multiply mo itong income after depreciation but before tax, parang ito yung income subject to tax. So kung i-multiply natin yan by the tax rate of 25%, nakukuha mo na actually yung total natin na income tax expense for the period. So dito lang, breakdown lang natin kung magkano ang related to current tax expense and magkano yung related to deferred tax naman or deferred taxes. So yan. Pero yun, dapat equal sila, para meron kang check and balance. So this will be your net income na. So if you want to know what's the impact in terms of the income statement presentation, hanggang dito lang, 6,375,000. Tapos, since meron tayong piecemeal realization, so what will appear in our profit or loss is ito lang 6,375,000. But again, since meron tayong piecemeal realization, nag-credit tayo ng 375,000 sa retained earnings. So if you want to know the total effect on retained earnings, ito na. Kasi yung profit mo or yung net income mo, i-close mo man yan sa retained earnings. So at the same time, yung adjustment mo sa piecemeal realization na 375,000. So the total effect on retained earnings would be 6,750,000. So to address what was being asked in the problem, so sabi niya dito, how much is the income tax expense? So I suppose this is the total income tax expense. So if you're going to compute lang for the total tax expense, so pwede nang ito na lang, establish lang natin kung magkano yung taxable income mo. Establish lang natin kung magkano yung income before or after depreciation but before tax. Itong 8.5 na to, then multiply mo by 25% so para makuha mo yung total income tax expense for 2021. Pero pwede naman kung confident ka na sa na-compute mong current tax expense, which is ito, 2,250,000. So adjusted by either increase, pag nag-increase yung deferred tax liability, of course, your income tax expense will also increase. Pero ito, nag-decrease man yung ating deferred tax liability. So the effect is magde-decrease din ang ating income tax expense. So 2,125,000 na lang. Okay, so that's it. Now, I hope you learned something from this video and thank you for listening. Bye.